The 1950s were ruled by tailfins, chrome, and V8 dreams. But not every sedan made it into the spotlight. Beneath the flash and fame of Bel Airs and Crown Victorias were forgotten four-doors that were rarer, stranger, or built in numbers so low they've nearly vanished from history. These weren't just obscure, they were overlooked gems, design oddities, or limited-run experiments you've likely never heard of. Here are 12 of the rarest American sedans from the 1950s, and once you see them, you'll wonder how they ever slipped through the cracks. Number 1. The 1957 Dodto Firesweep four-door Sportsman is one of the strangest, most enigmatic, full-size sedans to emerge from the late 1950s. A brief experiment in corporate compromise that left behind more questions than answers. It was not simply a car, it was a symbol of a brand on the verge of losing its identity, a canary in the coal mine for Dodto's eventual demise, and a monument to how quickly even the most flamboyant designs can vanish into obscurity when branding and purpose are lost. In 1957, the American automotive industry was at its stylistic peak. Fins soared skyward, chrome seemed to multiply exponentially, and designers like Virgil Exner were given unprecedented freedom to stretch the limits of visual excess. Chrysler's Forward Look campaign had injected radical modernism into their lineup, making their cars appear futuristic, fast, and utterly unlike anything else on the road. And yet, behind that dazzling facade was a nervous corporate structure desperately juggling budgets and platforms to keep 5 separate brands relevant and profitable. Dodto, once a proud step between Dodge and Chrysler, found itself increasingly squeezed. Sales had been slipping and corporate confidence was waning. So in 1957, Chrysler ordered that Dodto's new entry-level model, the Firesweep, would use the shorter, less expensive Dodge chassis rather than Dodto's traditional platform. This wasn't just a cost-saving measure, it was a branding experiment. Could you dress a Dodge up in Dodto chrome and sell it to a more prestige-minded buyer? The result was odd. From the front, the Firesweep wore the signature Dodto grille, a wide, toothy, almost predatory smile, with quad headlights mounted in exaggerated rocket-like bezels. The rear fins were styled in line with the more upscale Fireflight and Adventurer models, but they were perched awkwardly on a Dodge frame that wasn't quite long enough to make the proportions graceful. The front fenders and rear quarter panels didn't align in the way they did on true Dodtos. Underneath it all was the Dodge's 122-inch wheelbase, 4 inches shorter than the senior Dodtos, and under the skin were Dodge's floor pans, suspension, and geometry. But what truly set the four-door Sportsman version apart and into near-extinct status was its pillarless hardtop design. While most Firesweep sedans had a B-pillar, the Sportsman ditched it for a cleaner, uninterrupted side profile. The effect was undeniably sleek, echoing the rooflines of top-end Chrysler coupes. But it also made the car more expensive, more complex to build, and harder to market. After all, who was this car for? Luxury buyers could spend a bit more and get a real Fireflight. Budget-conscious drivers could buy the mechanically identical Dodge Coronet. The Firesweep four-door Sportsman sat in a no-man's land, too upscale to be entry-level, not prestigious enough to impress status-conscious shoppers. Power came from Dodge-sourced 325 cubic inch V8s, with the more potent 4-barrel versions making up to 260 horsepower. Paired with Chrysler's high-tech TorqueFlite push-button automatic transmission, the car moved briskly for its size, though not as effortlessly as a true Dodto Hemi might have. Ride and handling were competent, even comfortable, thanks to the torsion bar front suspension Chrysler had recently introduced. Still, it wasn't performance that would make or break the car. It was identity, or the lack thereof. Inside, the Firesweep Sportsman offered more flash than function. Gauges were ornate but oddly placed, materials varied depending on trim level, and the interior layout mirrored Dodge more than Dodto. Even Mopar salespeople reportedly struggled to explain the car's reason for existing. One former Dodto dealer recalled, "We had it on the lot next to the real Dodtos, and people always asked, why does this one look different? When you told them it was built on a Dodge frame, they'd just shake their heads and walk over to the Fireflight. Only around 3,479 of the four-door Sportsman hardtops were built in 1957, a minuscule number even by niche model standards, and they were gone the following year. DeSoto kept the Firesweep nameplate going into 1959, but the pillarless four-door never returned. The experiment had failed. In hindsight, the Firesweep four-door Sportsman became emblematic of everything that was going wrong with DeSoto: internal competition, unclear branding, over-reliance on badge engineering, and a shrinking audience who no longer understood what DeSoto stood for. Just 3 years later, the DeSoto brand itself would vanish completely. Survivors today are astonishingly rare. Most were treated as ordinary sedans and discarded long before the classic car boom made people appreciate oddball Mopars. Restoration is difficult, as parts are a weird mix of Dodge and DeSoto, many unique to the Firesweep alone. Enthusiasts who do manage to preserve one are often stopped at car shows by... Number 2. The 1954 Kaiser Manhattan Supercharged sedan was not just a car, it was a defiant swan song from a company that dared to go toe-to-toe with Detroit's Big Three, even as the odds were collapsing around it. It was built by a dying brand with a warrior spirit, one that refused to vanish quietly into irrelevance. In its final year of U.S. passenger car production, Kaiser Motors created something genuinely historic: the first mass-produced American car to come standard with a supercharger. Not a luxury Cadillac, not a factory hot rod Ford, but a sleek, jet-age family sedan from a company fighting for survival. To understand just how bold this move was, you have to rewind to the beginning of the 1950s. Kaiser Fraser, born in the aftermath of World War II, had been one of the most promising independent automakers in America. Henry J. Kaiser, an industrial titan known for wartime shipbuilding, believed that the post-war car market would be wide open for disruption. And for a time, he was right. The Kaiser and Fraser brands offered bold styling, spacious interiors, and smart engineering at competitive prices. But as the decade wore on, the Big Three tightened their stranglehold with massive production capacity, deeper pockets, and constant model upgrades. By 1953, Kaiser was slipping behind, and survival would require a Hail Mary. Enter the 1954 Kaiser Manhattan, and more specifically, its supercharged version. Kaiser's in-house engineers knew that their aging 226 cubic inch flathead inline six, an engine that had been around in one form or another since the 1930s, was no longer competitive in a world increasingly dominated by high-compression V8s. So, in a last-minute move of both desperation and genius, they fitted the six-cylinder engine with the McCulloch VS57 centrifugal supercharger. The result? A respectable 140 horsepower, up from just over 115 in naturally aspirated trim. That may not sound like much today, but in 1954 it was enough to give the Manhattan spirited acceleration and effortless highway cruising, something its earlier versions lacked. But performance was only part of the story. The Manhattan's true calling card was its radical design. With slab-sided fenders, a wraparound windshield, and minimal ornamentation, it looked positively space-age next to the fins and chrome excess of its contemporaries. The interior was equally bold: deep pile carpeting, two-tone upholstery, a full dash-width speedometer, and even a padded safety dashboard. In fact, Kaiser had been a pioneer in safety features since the early 50s, offering things like pop-out windshield glass, recessed knobs, and strong steel roof pillars long before the government cared. And then there was that whistle. The McCulloch supercharger, tucked tightly into the engine bay and driven off a belt system, let out a distinct high-pitched whine under acceleration. More airplane than automobile. To the average driver in 1954, it must have felt like piloting a four-door rocket ship. As one Kaiser enthusiast later put it, it looked like a jetliner and whistled like one too. Unfortunately, none of this innovation could overcome the hard realities of the market. Only around 1,400 supercharged Manhattans were sold in 1954. Dealers were struggling, production was winding down, and consumer confidence in the brand had already eroded. Kaiser had overextended its resources trying to build small cars like the Henry J, and its attempt to differentiate on safety and style simply wasn't enough. Later that year, Henry Kaiser pulled the plug on U.S. passenger car production. Kaiser Motors would retreat to Argentina and eventually fade into memory, though some of its designs and innovations would live on in other guises, including in Jeep, which Kaiser acquired. Today, the 1954 Kaiser Manhattan Supercharged sedan is a seldom-seen treasure, a relic of an alternate path in American automotive history. Restorers prize them for their styling, rarity, and unique drivetrain. The Supercharger system is still serviceable with patience, and a well-maintained example can cruise confidently at freeway speeds all day long, serenading onlookers with its turbine-like whine. It wasn't just the first supercharged production sedan in America. It was the last roar of an underdog, a car that tried to cheat death with style, technology, and a shrieking belt-driven boost system strapped to a tired old six. It was a gamble that didn't pay off, but for those lucky enough to own or drive one today, it's a reminder of just how brave car makers once were. Number 3. The 1955 Packard 400 sedan was the quiet final toast of a grand old mark. A highball raised in a darkened ballroom, the orchestra packing up, the guests long gone. While Packard's sleek two-door hardtop of the same name still finds occasional nostalgic praise, the sedan version, stately, long, and almost regal in its restraint, has slipped into near-total obscurity. Yet it deserves far more attention than it ever received, because in its quiet presence lies the tragic beauty of one of America's most respected automakers, fighting against the dying of the light. By 1955, Packard was no longer the confident titan that had once rivaled Cadillac and ruled the American luxury market through the 1930s. World War II production had briefly reignited its fortunes, but post-war missteps of issue, most critically and over-reliance on dated engineering and delayed modernization, had left it wounded. Cadillac had leapt ahead with sleek, powerful V8s and dramatic tailfins. Meanwhile, Packard was still selling conservatively styled straight eights with engineering that, though refined, felt out of step with the times. That changed, almost too late, in 1955. Newly revitalized under President James Nance, and with a cash infusion into styling and mechanical upgrades, Packard made a last-ditch effort to reclaim its place among America's elite. The result was a stunning lineup of dramatically updated models, torsion-level suspension, modern overhead valve V8 engines, and bold two-tone color schemes that finally gave Packard showroom appeal. The 400 was positioned at the upper edge of the lineup, a luxury flagship with tailored lines, wide chrome bands sweeping along its flanks, and interiors finished in brocade, leather, or cloth that rivaled anything from GM or Ford's luxury divisions. But while the 400 hardtop coupe got all the magazine coverage and advertising focus, the four-door sedan quietly existed in smaller numbers, a more reserved, formal version for executives, diplomats, and those who wanted grace without the flash. It shared the same 352 cubic inch V8 engine, making 260 horsepower, which was finally competitive with Cadillac, and paired it with Packard's new twin Ultramatic automatic transmission. Its ride quality was exceptional thanks to the torsion bar suspension system that auto-leveled in response to load, an innovation Packard beat both Cadillac and Lincoln to. From the outside, the 1955 400 sedan wore its formal wear well, a long hood, slightly arched roofline, and a rear quarter treatment that gave a subtle nod to the fastbacks of the late 40s. But unlike the coupe, its extra length and rear doors were tastefully integrated, not bloated or awkward. It had road presence, dignity, the sort of car you'd expect to see parked outside a governor's mansion, or gliding silently up to a hotel awning in Palm Springs. Yet for all its quality and quiet innovation, the 400 sedan suffered a fatal problem: timing. Packard was already hemorrhaging dealers, customers, and cash by the time the car reached showrooms. The brand's merger with Studebaker in 1954 had been disastrous, a shotgun wedding intended to boost production volume that instead drained resources and crippled engineering coordination. Studebaker's finances were worse than they had claimed, and Packard found itself shackled to a sinking ship. Production issues, supply chain headaches, and quality control lapses, especially with the new transmissions, tainted what should have been a triumphant return. Fewer than 7,400 sedans were built for 1955, making them far rarer than the coupes. Even fewer survive today. The following year, in 1956, Packard tried again with slightly revised styling and more powerful engines. But by then it was too late. That was the final year for true Packard production in Detroit. In 1957, the brand's name would be awkwardly stamped onto rebadged Studebakers, and by 1958, Packard was gone entirely. An echo of pre-war opulence erased by post-war pragmatism. Restorers today often bypass the 400 sedan in favor of the more photogenic hardtop coupes. But those who do take on the task are rewarded with one of the finest driving, full-size sedans of its day. The car floats over rough pavement, handles corners with a surprising lack of body roll, and delivers torque with velvet-smooth grace. And every once in a while, if you catch the light just right on its sweeping fender line, you can still glimpse the ghost of the Gilded Age Packard that once outran the best of them. As one longtime restorer put it, it was like a tuxedo for the road, but nobody came to the party. Indeed. So number 4, the 1956 Hudson Hornet V8 sedan was a ghost wearing another man's skin, the final gasp of a once proud powerhouse that had dominated NASCAR and performance culture in the early 1950s. But by '56, the original Hudson was already gone in everything but name. What rolled off the line wasn't the famous step-down Hornet that terrified the ovals and ruled the street. It was a rebadged Nash in a borrowed suit, hastily stitched together in the wake of corporate survival. And yet, for all its compromises, the 1956 Hornet V8 sedan deserves to be remembered, because it marked the last time the Hudson badge would ever adorn a true performance-oriented vehicle. To understand how strange and somber this sedan really was, you have to rewind to Hudson's heyday. In 1951, the Hornet debuted with a low-slung, step-down chassis and a high-compression straight 6 that devoured the competition. Hudson engineers had built a performance legend. The Hornet won race after race, years before the big V8 revolution, and became synonymous with raw American racing muscle. But as the decade wore on, Hudson couldn't keep up with the production scale and design budgets of the Big Three. So in 1954, Hudson and Nash Kelvinator merged to form American Motors Corporation, and with it came a quiet corporate funeral. For 1955, the first post-merger Hornets were already based on Nash platforms, built in Kenosha rather than Hudson's Detroit plant. The 1956 version, though, was AMC's attempt to polish the tombstone. On the outside, the Hudson Hornet V8 sedan looked decent. It had a long horizontal grille, a wraparound windshield, and a body that tried to blend Nash curves with Hudson aggression. A modest tail fin traced the rear fenders, and the two-tone paint options helped distract from the fact that most of the body tooling was recycled Nash metal. But under the hood was something new, and briefly exciting. Gone was Hudson's legendary straight 6. In its place, a Packard-sourced 352 cubic inch V8 making 220 horsepower. It was a genuine bruiser by 1956 standards and gave the Hornet V8 real freeway legs and surprising acceleration. It could outgun most Chevrolets of the same year and hang with mid-tier Mercurys and Fords. Combined with AMC's decent suspension geometry and Hudson's still decent engineering instincts, the V8 Hornet was a shockingly capable full-size performance sedan, even if it wore the wrong clothes. But the public wasn't buying it, literally. Sales were abysmal. Just 3,108 V8 Hornets were sold in 1956, as brand loyalists turned away in disappointment, and younger buyers ignored Hudson entirely in favor of flashier, more glamorous offerings from GM and Ford. AMC didn't help matters. Their marketing was confusing, and the overlap between Nash and Hudson models made both brands feel diluted. For all its merits, the V8 Hornet sedan was born into a world where its parent company no longer knew how to sell speed or style. Inside, the Hornet V8 was comfortable but forgettable. The dash was a Nash carryover with simple gauges and toggle switches, and although materials were decent, the interior lacked the bespoke charm Hudson once prided itself on. No one had the time or money to redesign the cockpit, and it showed. It was a sedan engineered for function, not flair. Practical, but a poor match for the bold name it carried. And then it was over. After 1956, Hudson ceased to exist as a standalone brand. AMC axed it entirely, keeping Nash for another year before dropping that too. By 1958, AMC itself had reshaped into something smaller, leaner, and less concerned with performance, leaving behind the wreckage of two former giants. Today, the 1956 Hudson Hornet V8 sedan exists in the margins of classic car history. Few survived, and fewer still are restored. Enthusiasts often overlook it, favoring the earlier real Hornets with their step-down frames and race pedigree. But those who have driven the 56 V8 describe it as something strange and beautiful. A comfortable cruiser with hidden claws, a sedan with far more bite than anyone expected. As one AMC historian put it, the Hornet buzzed one last time. Nobody heard. Indeed, its hum was muffled beneath badge engineering, corporate panic, and public indifference. But in that last flicker of power and style, Hudson tried one final time to live up to its name. And for a brief moment, it almost succeeded. Number 5, the 1958 Edsil Citation 4-door hardtop wasn't just a car. It was an overchromed monument to corporate hubris, a rolling symbol of what happens when a marketing dream becomes a production nightmare. At the very peak of Edsil's ill-fated hierarchy sat the Citation, more expensive, more ostentatious, and somehow even more misunderstood than the rest of the lineup. Though the Edsil name itself is synonymous with failure, the Citation hardtop represents a rarer, more extravagant strain of that downfall. The luxury flagship of a brand that barely had time to find the keys to the showroom. Introduced in the fall of 1957 as a 1958 model, the Edsil line was meant to slot neatly between Ford and Mercury in Ford Motor Company's rapidly expanding empire. But the market didn't want another brand, and what the public got instead was a line of cars that looked alien, cost too much, and arrived just in time for a sudden economic recession. Nowhere was this disconnect more exaggerated than in the Edsil Citation, the top-of-the-line trim level that combined the flash of a high-end Mercury with the sheen and thirst of a full-size Ford, and then cranked everything up to 11. The Citation 4-door hardtop was one of the most ambitious entries in the 1958 Edsil family, aimed directly at Buick and Oldsmobile customers. It rode on a massive 124-inch wheelbase shared with Mercury, and it was loaded with futuristic touches, teardrop tail lights, boomerang side creases, multi-tone paint schemes, and the infamous horse collar grille. A vertical oval front end that resembled a toilet seat to critics, a jet intake to defenders, and nothing at all to confused buyers. It was supposed to scream space-age elegance. It mostly just confused people. And then there was the interior. For its time, the Citation's cabin was a glittering techno cockpit. The centerpiece was the Teletouch push-button transmission selector. Mounted in the steering wheel hub, a bold and bewildering piece of engineering that allowed drivers to change gears with finger pressure on buttons where the horn usually sat. It was finicky, electrically delicate, and incredibly easy to bump accidentally. Many owners disabled it altogether, preferring to just leave the car and drive. Under the hood, the Citation wasn't lacking muscle. Most came equipped with the big 410 cubic inch MEL series V8, essentially a bored-out Lincoln motor, making 345 horsepower and enough torque to haul the Titanic out of dry dock. But all that power came at a cost. The Citation was a gas guzzler of the highest order, routinely averaging single-digit MPG figures even under gentle cruising. And with a curb weight just shy of 4,500 pounds, it drove more like a grand piano on roller skates than a sleek, space-age saloon. Only about 6,500 Citation 4-door hardtops were ever built for 1958, a fraction of the already disappointing Edsil total production. Within a year, Ford began slashing Edsil's model lineup, and by 1960, the brand was dead. The Citation was never revived for the final model year. The remaining few examples mostly vanished into scrapyards or were cannibalized for parts. Today, spotting a 1958 Edsil Citation 4-door hardtop is like finding a chrome-plated time capsule buried in a forgotten corner of the American dream. They're not common at shows. Even Edsil fans tend to focus on the convertibles or two-door hardtops, which are lighter, sleeker, and more photogenic. But for collectors who know what they're looking at, the four-door Citation is the ultimate expression of a brand trying desperately to be noticed. Too flashy for its own good, too strange to be accepted, and too late to make a difference. As one longtime Edsil Owners Club archivist famously remarked, it was overstyled, overpriced, and overlooked. But if you wanted to drive a corporate fever dream, there was no better way. And that's exactly what it was. Not just a car, but a surreal expression of 1950s optimism spinning out of control. All tailfins, buttons, and blind faith in design by committee. The 1958 Edsil Citation four-door hardtop wasn't just rare. It was a limited edition monument to misplaced ambition, driven for a brief moment by people who still believed Detroit could shape the future, even if they had no idea what that future looked like. Number 6. The 1953 Dodge Coronet Hemi sedan is one of those historical anomalies that shouldn't exist. A nondescript post-war family four-door quietly packing one of the most revolutionary engines of its era. While most buyers in 1953 were looking for comfort, affordability, and simplicity in a full-size sedan, Dodge was quietly slipping in a powertrain that would later define American muscle, the Red Ram Hemi. It was small, it was early, and it was hidden under the hood of what looked like a car your grandmother would drive to Sunday service. To understand how bizarre and quietly important this car was, you have to remember what 1953 looked like in the American car landscape. Chevrolet and Ford were still largely pushing six-cylinder engines. The V8 revolution was just around the corner, with Oldsmobile and Cadillac already dipping into high-compression territory. But Dodge was mostly known for being the sensible division in Chrysler's lineup. Conservative, durable, affordable. But Chrysler engineers had been working behind the scenes on a whole new approach to combustion: hemispherical combustion chambers. And in 1951, Chrysler shocked the world with the firepower Hemi in its luxury lineup. By 1953, Dodge wanted in on the action, and they did it in the most unlikely way possible. Enter the Dodge Coronet Hemi sedan. At a glance, the Coronet was a mild-mannered, full-size family sedan, boxy and understated, with tall fenders, conservative trim, and a face that looked more curious than aggressive. No fins, no scoops, no badges screaming power. But under the hood, in select builds, was the brand new 241 cubic inch Red Ram V8, Dodge's first ever Hemi engine. It made 140 horsepower, which in 1953 was serious muscle. By comparison, a 53 Chevrolet Bel Air six-cylinder made just 115 HP. The Red Ram wasn't just about numbers, though. It was about breathing. The hemispherical heads allowed for better airflow and more efficient combustion, giving the engine torque and throttle response few of its competitors could match. Only about 4,800 Coronets were equipped with the Hemi that year. Most made it to Dodge's gyro torque fluid drive transmission, a strange but smooth semi-automatic system. Though clunky by modern standards, it gave the car a sort of refined power delivery, the kind of thing your average suburban driver might not even notice until they realized they'd left that Oldsmobile or Mercury in the rearview mirror. What made the Coronet Hemi truly bizarre wasn't just the specs, it was the disconnect between appearance and performance. No scoops, no stripes, no dual exhausts, just a sleepy four-door sedan that could quietly outrun a surprising number of period cars without breaking a sweat. One owner described it best: nobody knew Grandma's Dodge could outgun a Buick. Inside, the Coronet was utilitarian but comfortable, with wide bench seats, a big plastic steering wheel, and gauges set into chrome bezels. It had the look and feel of middle-class America. No frills competence. But in Hemi form, it became something else entirely: a mechanical wolf in dowdy sheep's clothing. Unfortunately, Dodge never capitalized on this early performance potential. The Red Ram stayed in the lineup, but the focus soon shifted toward flashier body styles and more marketable performance models. The Coronet Hemi sedan became a short-lived experiment, a testbed for what would later become Dodge's muscle identity, but one that few people noticed at the time. Today, the 1953 Dodge Coronet Hemi sedan is a holy grail among Mopar historians and early V8 collectors. Finding one in original Hemi spec is a rare thrill, and seeing one in motion is even rarer. It's not loud or flashy, it doesn't announce itself. But those who know what's under the hood know they're looking at one of the first true performance sedans in American automotive history. A quiet revolution wrapped in gray metal and chrome bumpers. It didn't look the part, but it changed the game, silently, one stoplight at a time. Number 7. The 1959 Ramler Rebel Custom 4-door is one of the most underestimated sleepers in American automotive history. A prim and proper sedan that looked like it belonged in a church parking lot, but packed enough punch under the hood to leave more flamboyant V8 cruisers gasping in its wake. To most casual observers, it was just another sensible AMC product, tidy, compact by late 1950s standards, and clearly aimed at the cost-conscious family man who cared more about fuel economy than flair. But for those who knew what to ask for and knew what that Rebel badge really meant, the custom V8 version delivered something much wilder. Brute power wrapped in button-down dignity. The Ramler Rebel name itself already carried some weight. Back in 1957, American Motors stunned the public by offering the first mass-produced American muscle car in the form of the original Rebel model. A mid-size sedan with a 255 horsepower 327 cubic inch V8. It beat Pontiac's GTO by years, even if it never got the same glory. By 1959, AMC had softened the Rebel's image slightly, integrating it into the broader Rambler line. But that didn't mean it was neutered. In fact, when properly optioned, the 1959 Rebel Custom 4-door could still deliver surprisingly aggressive performance, thanks to AMC's continued use of their powerful 250 and 327 cubic inch V8s and a relatively light curb weight. The Rebel Custom trim was the highest spec Rebel you could get that year, and it brought with it a host of upscale features: two-tone paint options, extra exterior chrome, upgraded interior appointments, and the kind of restrained styling that looked perfectly respectable in middle-class suburbia. But the hidden gem was under the hood. While base Rebels came with a 6-cylinder, savvy buyers could opt for AMC's 250 cube V8 rated at 215 horsepower, or in limited cases, a 270 HP 327 V8 borrowed from the Ambassador line. This was not just a mild cruiser anymore. This was a wolf in mid-century plaid, and it moved. Period road tests described the V8 Rebel as shockingly quick for such a mild-looking car. We're talking 0 to 60 in under 9 seconds. In 1959, from a 4-door sedan that looked like a secretary's commute car, even more astonishing was the car's handling. Compact dimensions gave it better balance than many of its full-size competitors, and AMC's unibody construction gave it structural rigidity that Ford and GM were still dreaming of. Add in a 3-speed manual or optional flash-o-matic automatic, and you had a refined but very real performance sedan, long before the term even existed. But AMC never quite knew how to market it. They were still clinging to their economy and durability reputation, and putting ads out for a powerful Rebel might have seemed like betraying the company's thrifty image. As a result, very few buyers even knew this version existed. Less than 2,500 of the Rebel Custom 4-door V8s were produced in 1959, making it a vanishingly rare combination, not just rare in the sense of production numbers, but rare in the sense of philosophy. This was a car that delivered muscle without machismo, speed without stripes, attitude without arrogance. Inside, the Rebel Custom offered cloth and vinyl bench seats, full instrumentation, and subtle bright work. It wasn't flashy, and that was the whole point. You weren't supposed to know this was a performance car. It was built for the kind of guy who wanted to beat a Pontiac Star Chief off the line and then quietly return to his office job without anyone the wiser. And that's exactly what makes the 1959 Ramler Rebel Custom 4-door so compelling today. It didn't scream, it didn't boast, it just moved, faster than it had any right to at dormers, and did so with a kind of smug, unassuming grace. AMC may have been an underdog brand, but in this moment, they understood something the big three often missed. That performance doesn't need to be loud or flashy. Sometimes it's better when it isn't. As one AMC enthusiast memorably put it, "It was a rocket in a librarian's body. If you knew, you knew. And if you didn't, well, you'd already lost at the stoplight." Today, these Rebels are almost impossible to find in stock V8 custom trim. Most were scrapped, passed down, or simply forgotten, victims of their own understatement. But for those lucky few who discover one in a barn or backlot, they're uncovering more than a rare AMC. They're uncovering one of the earliest and most elegant examples of the American sleeper sedan, and proof that even in the age of tailfins and showboating, true rebellion could wear a tie. Number 8. The 1951 Fraser Manhattan sedan is not merely a car. It is a rare and evocative chapter in the sweeping saga of post-war American automotive design. A poignant symbol of ambition, elegance, and ultimately, the ruthless realities of the market. Fraser, a mark birthed from the ambitious Kaiser Fraser Corporation, was a bold underdog in the automotive world. Emerging from the ashes of World War II, Kaiser Fraser hoped to challenge the hegemony of Detroit's Big Three by crafting cars that balanced modernity with refinement. But by 1951, the brand was gasping for breath, besieged by fierce competition and internal struggles. Yet, in its final moments, Fraser produced the Manhattan sedan, a machine that even in its fleeting existence captured a grace and sophistication that many American cars of the era lacked. From the very first sight, the Manhattan seduced with a design language that was more European aristocrat than industrial American. Its silhouette was a masterclass in restrained elegance. Long, sweeping pontoon fenders that seamlessly wrapped the wheels, a gently sloping roofline that stretched to the rear in a fluid gesture, and a broad, imposing grille that balanced boldness without excess. Unlike the flashy chrome explosions common among the Detroit giants, the Manhattan's trim was measured, thoughtful, and classy. It wore its luxury quietly, as if confident enough to not need ostentation. Beneath this handsome exterior lay an inline-six engine that was dependable, if not particularly muscular, by later muscle car standards, producing enough torque and power to comfortably carry its well-appointed cabin. The engine's smoothness and reliability were paramount. Fraser was selling refinement, not raw horsepower. Inside, the cabin was an intimate sanctuary, upholstered with meticulous care and rich materials that whispered quality. Chrome accents, thoughtful instrument layouts, and ample passenger space created an environment that rivaled luxury European sedans, a testament to Kaiser Fraser's commitment to creating a distinguished driving experience. However, the Manhattan's brilliance was also its tragedy. Launched into a marketplace dominated by the likes of Chevrolet, Ford, and Chrysler, Fraser simply lacked the production scale, marketing muscle, and dealer infrastructure to compete effectively. Priced at a premium to reflect its quality and exclusivity, it was caught in a cruel bind. Too expensive for the average buyer who wanted reliable transportation, and too niche to sway the affluent customer loyal to established luxury marquees. As a result, the production numbers were devastatingly low. Fewer than 2,000 units rolled off the assembly line in 1951 before the Fraser name was consigned to history. The story of the Fraser Manhattan is not just one of a car, but of a dream that almost was. It speaks to a moment in post-war America when independent automakers tried to redefine luxury and performance on their own terms, and the brutal economics that crushed those aspirations. Its design hinted at a future where cars would no longer be mere metal boxes, but artful expressions of style and grace. The Manhattan prefigured many design trends that would become mainstream later in the decade, especially the emphasis on aerodynamic, pontoon-style fenders, and smoother, flowing lines. Today, surviving examples of the Fraser Manhattan are scarce treasures, coveted by collectors who appreciate not just the car's beauty, but the story it tells. A story of ambition, innovation, and the harsh realities of a cutthroat industry. Driving or even seeing a Manhattan today is like stepping into a time capsule, a moment frozen when American car design flirted with something more refined and worldly before reverting to the brute force and bling that would dominate the 1950s and beyond. One devoted classic car historian reflected, "The Fraser Manhattan was a fragile jewel in an ocean of iron. It dared to be different, but in the end, it was swallowed by the tide." The car's legacy is bittersweet, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful and visionary creations are those that never get their moment in the sun. And for those who find a Manhattan tucked away in a forgotten barn or tucked quietly in a museum corner, they have discovered a piece of lost American artistry, a quiet rebellion against the ordinary, a fleeting whisper of elegance in the roaring post-war automotive age. Number 10. The 1958 Mercury Metalist sedan is one of the most overlooked and enigmatic vehicles in Mercury's history, representing a fleeting attempt by the brand to capture a budget-conscious segment of the full-size car market during a time of considerable economic and industry upheaval. Positioned as the entry-level model for Mercury's 1958 lineup, the Metalist was a curious creation. Neither quite as refined and luxurious as Mercury's flagship models, nor as basic and accessible as Ford's offerings. This awkward middle ground contributed heavily to its swift disappearance from production and memory, turning it into one of the rarest and least documented full-size Mercurys ever built. At first glance, the Metalist sedan embodied the classic styling cues of late 1950s Mercury cars. Sweeping lines, generous chrome accents, and those distinctive bat-wing tailfins that define the era's automotive flamboyance. The bodywork was elegantly restrained compared to some contemporaries, yet it retained enough flair to appeal to buyers who wanted a taste of Mercury's more upscale image without paying the premium price. Inside, the Metalist was pragmatic rather than opulent, with a basic but functional interior featuring durable materials, simple instrumentation, and modest comfort features, enough to satisfy middle-class families looking for reliable transportation without excessive luxury. Under the hood, the Metalist offered a modest range of powertrains, including inline-six engines and small-block V8s, providing an adequate balance of fuel economy and performance for everyday driving. Unlike Mercury's more powerful and performance-oriented siblings, the Metalist was designed to be economical and accessible, focusing on practical motoring rather than excitement or prestige. This made it appealing in theory, but also left it without a compelling identity in a competitive marketplace increasingly polarized between entry-level and luxury vehicles. The timing of the Metalist launch proved to be a critical challenge. The late 1950s were marked by economic recession and fluctuating consumer confidence, which had an immediate impact on car buying behavior. Buyers were increasingly selective, often gravitating toward vehicles that clearly differentiated themselves in terms of style, features, or price. The Metalist, caught between Ford's lower-tier models and Mercury's higher-end offerings like the Monterey and Montclair, suffered from a lack of clear marketing direction and consumer recognition. Dealers reportedly struggled to position the Metalist effectively, with many customers confused about why they would choose it over other Mercury or Ford models. Production numbers underscore this difficulty. Fewer than 300 Metalist sedans rolled off assembly lines in 1958, making it one of the rarest Mercury full-size sedans ever produced. By 1959, Mercury dropped the Metalist name entirely, folding the entry-level segment back into more clearly defined model tiers. The Metalist quickly faded from dealership lots, catalogs, and eventually public consciousness, becoming a footnote in Mercury's story, overshadowed by flashier and more successful siblings. Today's surviving 1958 Mercury Metalists are exceedingly rare and highly sought after by collectors and historians who value the car as a symbol of a turbulent moment in American automotive history. It represents a bold but ultimately unsuccessful attempt by Mercury to broaden its market reach during an era of economic uncertainty and intense competition. Its rarity and understated presence give it a quiet mystique, embodying a what-might-have-been scenario where a well-built, modest sedan could have potentially carved a niche if circumstances had been different. A longtime Mercury historian reflected on the Metalist's legacy, saying, "The Metalist was a whisper in the storm, a car that tried to balance frugality with a dash of Mercury's soul but got lost in the shuffle." It reminds us that not every experiment succeeds, but every attempt tells a story about the brand's resilience and the realities of the marketplace. The 1958 Mercury Metalist sedan remains a fascinating artifact of its era, a modest vehicle that quietly vanished but still captures the imagination of those who cherish the overlooked and forgotten chapters of American car lore. Number 10. The 1958 Mercury Metalist sedan, occupies a strange, often overlooked corner in the story of American full-size cars, a fleeting model that emerged at a time when Mercury was grappling with its identity amid shifting consumer tastes and economic uncertainty. Introduced as the brand's most affordable full-size option for the 1958 model year, the Metalist was Mercury's attempt to capture budget-conscious buyers who wanted a big, comfortable car, but without the bells and whistles and price tag of the higher-trim Mercurys. Yet, despite its practical intentions, the Metalist found itself caught in the crossfire of a turbulent market and internal brand confusion that ultimately doomed it to obscurity. 1958 was a tough year for American automakers. The country was recovering from a sharp recession that sapped consumer confidence and tightened car buyers' budgets. Simultaneously, Mercury itself was in a transitional phase, trying to define its place between the mainstream Ford line and the more luxurious Lincoln brand. The Metalist, with its pared-down trim and modest standard features, was Mercury's answer to the rising tide of economical full-size cars flooding the market from competitors. Mercury aimed to lure buyers who needed the practicality and size of a full-size sedan, but at a price point closer to the volume-selling Ford models. The Metalist was built on the same sturdy platform as other Mercurys, but stripped of many luxury appointments. Its styling was more restrained, its interior simpler, and its engine choices focused on reliable, efficient V8 and six-cylinder options rather than high performance. This was a car for the no-nonsense buyer who valued space and durability, but didn't want to pay for unnecessary extravagance. Mercury's goal was to maintain brand loyalty by offering a gateway full-size car that could compete with similarly priced Chevrolet or Plymouth models. Despite these practical ambitions, the Metalist's timing couldn't have been worse. The economic recession slowed overall car sales, and Mercury's own marketing struggled to clearly communicate the Metalist's place in the lineup. Buyers found the model confusing. It was a Mercury, yet it was clearly the entry-level model, and in many ways felt too close to a Ford. Meanwhile, Mercury's traditional buyers were shifting their attention to the more luxurious and feature-rich Monterey and Montclair models, leaving the Metalist stranded in an uncertain middle ground. Sales reflected this confusion. Fewer than 3,300 Metalist sedans were sold in 1958, making it one of the rarest Mercury models ever produced. Its brief production run, discontinued after just one model year, meant that the Metalist quickly faded from showroom floors and dealer catalogs. Mercury itself seemed to quickly forget the model's existence, focusing instead on refining its core lineup and re-establishing its upscale image in the years that followed. Collectors today find the Metalist fascinating precisely because of its rarity and its role as a symbol of a brand in flux. It's a car that represents a moment when Mercury was experimenting with how to balance affordability and prestige, but ultimately couldn't find the right formula. Restoring a Metalist is a challenge, as few survive intact, and parts are scarce due to its short production span and low sales. Yet for those who track the twists and turns of mid-century American automotive history, the 1958 Mercury Metalist sedan stands as a poignant reminder that even storied brands sometimes stumble and produce models that slip quietly into the shadows. As a Ford archivist once dryly noted, even Mercury forgot they built it. That sums up the Metalist's legacy, a brief, humble attempt to fill a gap in the market that was swiftly erased by the tides of economic pressure and brand realignment. Today, the Metalist is a rare, elusive ghost of Mercury's past, an affordable full-size sedan that never quite found its place, yet remains a fascinating piece of the puzzle for classic car historians and enthusiasts alike. Number 11. The 1957 Studebaker President Classic Sedan remains one of the most fascinating yet tragic entries in the annals of American automotive history. Emerging during an era when the Big Three, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, dominated the marketplace with their flashy, chrome-drenched models and massive dealer networks, Studebaker's attempt to carve out a niche as a serious contender in the luxury segment was nothing short of audacious. The President Classic was conceived as the flagship of this ambition, designed to showcase Studebaker's forward-looking engineering and unique styling, in hopes of elevating the company's image from an underdog to an innovator capable of competing with Detroit's heavyweights. Stylistically, the 1957 President Classic was a stark departure from the over-the-top tailfin excesses that characterized much of the late 50s American cars. Its design was sleek, with smooth aerodynamic body lines and a restrained elegance that gave it a subtle but unmistakably modern presence on the road. Unlike the flashy competitors, the President Classic offered a quiet sophistication, blending form and function with its unique grille treatment, tapered roofline, and carefully sculpted side panels. Inside, Studebaker spared no effort, equipping the cabin with high-quality materials, well-padded seats, and a driver-focused dashboard layout that suggested a European sensibility more than the typical American excess. The interior, while comfortable, was designed with a sense of understated luxury, aiming to attract buyers who desired refinement over gaudy flash. The President Classic's technical ambitions were equally remarkable. Studebaker was among the first American manufacturers to push fuel injection technology, and this sedan was one of the early adopters of this advanced system. The fuel-injected V8 promised improved power output and fuel efficiency at a time when most competitors were still relying on carburetors. This engineering feat, while visionary, came with significant challenges. The technology was new and complicated, leading to reliability problems and making the cars difficult and expensive to maintain for dealers and owners alike. Furthermore, the sophistication of the fuel injection system required highly trained mechanics in a dealer network that Studebaker simply could not provide at scale, which hindered customer confidence. Financially, Studebaker was already fighting an uphill battle. The company was smaller, less capitalized, and lacked the economies of scale enjoyed by the Detroit giants. The cost of developing and producing such an advanced and upscale model put enormous strain on Studebaker's limited resources. Marketing the President Classic proved equally difficult. Buyers who wanted luxury and performance were naturally drawn to brands like Cadillac, Lincoln, and Buick, which had established reputations, larger networks, and a proven track record. To many consumers, Studebaker was still a niche or budget brand, which made it hard for the President Classic to gain traction. The economic climate of the late 1950s compounded these woes. With rising interest rates, a recession looming, and increasing concerns over fuel economy, many consumers hesitated to invest in a relatively unknown luxury sedan that demanded premium maintenance and carried a high sticker price. In the end, production of the 1957 President Classic sedan was limited to fewer than 4,000 units before Studebaker abruptly halted the model. The company chose to retreat, focusing instead on more affordable and mainstream cars to sustain its business, effectively abandoning its brief flirtation with luxury and cutting-edge technology. The President Classic quickly faded from the public eye, becoming a rare and enigmatic artifact of an ambitious but ultimately doomed experiment. Today, it is prized by collectors and historians not only for its rarity, but for what it symbolizes: the last bold gasp of an independent automaker striving to innovate in a market increasingly dominated by corporate giants. Enthusiasts admire the President Classic for its distinctive blend of style, advanced technology, and the unyielding spirit of a company trying to rewrite its destiny. As a longtime Studebaker historian once poignantly put it, the 1957 President Classic was a brilliant dream caught in a storm. It was a car that looked to the future, but was anchored by the weight of its past and the realities of the industry. It reminds us that innovation alone isn't enough. Timing, resources, and perception are equally crucial. The legacy of the 1957 Studebaker President Classic sedan endures as a testament to vision and vulnerability. A beautiful but fleeting chapter in the history of American cars that continues to captivate and inspire those who seek the untold stories behind the steel. Number 12. The 1959 Pontiac Pathfinder sedan stands as a remarkable and largely forgotten chapter in the history of General Motors' Canadian operations, a vehicle that embodies the unique challenges, compromises, and clever engineering solutions that automakers faced in tailoring their products for distinct regional markets during the late 1950s. To understand the true significance of the Pathfinder, one must first appreciate the context in which it was created. A time when the North American automotive industry was not yet the fully integrated behemoth it is today. but rather a patchwork of separate divisions, brands, and national markets, each with its own demands, preferences, and regulatory frameworks. In 1959, Pontiac in the United States was well known for its image as a performance-oriented, stylish brand positioned just below Chevrolet and above the entry-level brands in GM's hierarchy. However, in Canada, Pontiac's role was notably different. The Canadian market was smaller and more economically conservative, with buyers often prioritizing durability, ease of maintenance, and cost over outright style or horsepower. This reality led General Motors of Canada to adopt a strategy that was both practical and, by today's standards, somewhat unusual, offering a Pontiac that was, in essence, a rebadged Chevrolet underneath. The result was the Pontiac Pathfinder, a sedan that outwardly flaunted Pontiac's signature design cues, such as its distinctive grille, badging, and trim, but was built on Chevrolet's platform with Chevrolet mechanical components, including the frame, suspension, and drivetrain. This extensive badge engineering was driven by several key factors. First, by sharing major components between brands, GM could keep production costs down and simplify inventory for Canadian dealers, who face smaller sales volumes and less demand for a broad variety of parts than their American counterparts. Second, Canadian automotive regulations and taxes often differed from U.S. standards, making it economically sensible to design a model specifically for the local market rather than importing U.S. versions that might not comply with those requirements or would be prohibitively expensive due to tariffs and shipping costs. Third, the Pathfinder was aimed at a segment of Canadian customers who sought an affordable, reliable family sedan, but still wanted the prestige and perceived quality associated with the Pontiac name. Despite its pragmatic origins, the 1959 Pontiac Pathfinder sedan did manage to maintain a degree of Pontiac flair and visual appeal. The car's exterior styling incorporated elements that were clearly Pontiac, including the sweeping chrome trim, the silver streak hood design, and the elegant tailfins characteristic of the late 50s. Inside, the interior featured Pontiac's design touches and upholstery options, giving buyers a sense of owning a genuine Pontiac rather than just a rebadged Chevy. However, beneath the surface, the vehicle was Chevrolet through and through, powered by Chevrolet's reliable small-block V8 or inline-six engines and built on a Chevrolet frame. Production numbers for the 1959 Pontiac Pathfinder were low. Likely only a few thousand units were made, and the model was exclusively sold in Canada, making it one of the rarest Pontiacs ever produced. The car's rarity was compounded by the fact that many Canadian Pontiacs were subsequently sold used in the US, where the Pathfinder's identity was often confused or erased, making surviving examples even harder to track down and restore. For many years, the Pathfinder was little more than an automotive curiosity known primarily to Canadian classic car enthusiasts and a handful of GM historians. Today, the Pontiac Pathfinder holds a unique place among vintage American cars, not for its performance or innovation, but for its embodiment of mid-century automotive industrial strategy. It represents an era when car companies took regional needs seriously enough to create market-specific models, sometimes blending brands in unusual ways to serve local buyers efficiently. Restoring and maintaining a Pathfinder is a challenge for collectors, as it requires understanding and sourcing parts from both Pontiac and Chevrolet catalogs, along with a deep appreciation for GM's complex brand architecture of the era. As one longtime Canadian collector once said, the Pathfinder was Pontiac's best-kept secret north of the border, a car that wore the badge but shared the bones with its Chevy cousin. It's a glimpse into a time when car companies didn't just build cars, they built solutions for a patchwork continent. For those who love the intricacies of automotive history, the 1959 Pontiac Pathfinder sedan is more than just a rare model. It's a symbol of adaptation, innovation, and the fascinating compromises that shaped the North American car landscape in the golden age of motoring.